Introductions and welcome. So welcome everybody. I'm Andrew Stark. I'm one of the co-directors of Walk, Listen, Create. A colleague of mine is on call, Babak, who's in Sao Paulo, talking with one of his kittens at the moment, is also another co-director. Walk, Listen, Create, it's a not-for-profit. We're based, registered in Belgium, so we can access EU funding. And what we do is we run a community of authors, writers, performers, artists, and what we try to do is create entertaining online events, of which Tim Parks has very graciously accepted our invitation as a guest. We're going to talk about his writing, his approaches to writing, and especially two books, one of which is Mr. Geography, which is his latest novel, and another which is called The Hero's Way, in which he steps out with his wife and follows in the footsteps of a retreating, escaping Garibaldi. Tim Parks, as we know, he's an award-winning British author and translator with many titles to his name. Two of his most recent books have used a walk as a frame to tell a story. One, a novel on a 200-mile walk across the Alps from Switzerland to Italy, and another following in the footsteps of Garibaldi as he fled Rome with 4,000 troops. And that's a walk that Tim and his wife Eleonora undertook, which is something like 400 miles or so. So he's given me a nice short bio to introduce him with. So he writes, Tim's written many works of fiction and non-fiction of various kind, shortlisted for the Booker, best-selling books about Italy, a couple of history books, a book about chronic pain and meditation, endless articles for literary journals, and many translations of celebrated Italian authors. So, which is
Didn't expect you to read that out straight there, Andrew, but there you go.
Okay, so I'm going to start. Which you prefer writing, fiction or non-fiction?
Well, those are impossible questions, you know. I mean, sometimes you enjoy writing one book more than another, but let's say that the books like, my real feeling of vocation is towards the novels, but you can't keep writing intense novels one after the other. So I've written some non-fiction books, and sometimes it's been a huge pleasure and sometimes less so. But I only really write books that I want to write. So it's almost always a pleasure of one kind or another. I mean, it just depends if sometimes a book is a happy book in the sense that not that the content is happy, but that you just feel it's working for you, you know, and other times you feel it's hard work. So this book, The Hero's Way, was a wonderful book to write. And a book I didn't really expect to write, but when I got going, I just realized it was a wonderful subject. So, you know.
Yeah. So, but you've had I mean, for those people who are on the call who aren't familiar with Garibaldi, when did you get excited by him and why?
Okay, so let's try and get a sense of why I wrote this book and what this is about and who this was. So it might be worth saying that I've lived in Italy for 40 years more now. I've always been fascinated by the Risorgimento, which was the historical process by which Italy managed to become a unified independent country in 1860. Before that, it was split into a bunch of separate states, many areas run by foreign powers, Austria in particular. But not only Austria. I mean, there were periods when there was Spanish and French and so on and so forth. So Garibaldi was one of the most attractive figures in the Risorgimento. He was he was a sort of volunteer war leader, not attached to any particular state, a revolutionary who aligned himself with people who are trying to get Italy into a unified independent country. So in 1848, 1849, as you possibly know, there were revolutions all over Europe, and one of them was in Rome. And Garibaldi went there, and they defended a free Rome, a democratic Rome, the first time there had been democratic elections in Italy in 1849. And they defended that against French troops and papal troops and Spanish troops and Neapolitan troops. And when the city was under siege for about 6 months, and when the siege collapsed, Garibaldi didn't want to surrender, so he took about 4,500 men, about 4,000 men and 800 cavalry. He took them out of the city and he tried to take them to Venice, which is an awful long way. And he wanted to get to Venice because in Venice there was another revolution that was still surviving. But between him and Venice, he had about 7 Austrian armies who were occupying the whole of northern and central Italy. And he had French armies behind him, chasing him, and a Spanish army sort of to the east of him. So it was a completely it was a desperate adventure, and many people didn't make it. Anyway, I had come across by chance, as I was writing a review of a book about the revolution, I had come across through a footnote a reference to a diary by a German man who had been Garibaldi's aide-de-camp during this retreat. And I thought that sounds interesting. And I managed to find online a copy in Italian of this diary. It wasn't in print at the time. I see it's come out again. It's about 600 pages long, you know, because he was there right through the revolution, which was very exciting. But he gives a blow-by-blow account of what happened on this incredible retreat. And I remember I was reading this and I thought, I like this guy. I mean, I like this diary. And I just said to my wife, what about we take a walk? We could do that. It's only 630 kilometers. I mean, that is about 400 and something miles. And I really had no idea. I thought this would be a good holiday. I mean, we do walks. We do long walks anyway. And, I thought, well, if it's really interesting and we can talk about Italy today and Italy 160, 70 years ago, then maybe I could do a book. I wasn't sure. I'd never done a book like that before. So, I mean, that was the story. But I mean, the funny thing was that I thought it was going to be a holiday because then, you start getting obsessive. You think, well, we'll try and do it in the same days that Garibaldi did it. So Garibaldi walks from Rome and they zigzag across Italy because they're being chased by armies and they're having to hide and they're having to create confusion. So the walk's much longer than if you just walked. And he gets to a place called Cesenatico, which is on the Adriatic coast, and there they take boats to Venice, and that doesn't end well. So by the time they got there were only a few hundred left. I mean, everything had happened. And we decided to do it the same days, and they did it in July and August. So July and August means 35, 36 degrees, which means you pretty much have to leave before dawn if you're going to do the same distance, because we wanted to do the same distance they had done every day. We managed that most days, but towards the end, the last 48 hours, they walked non-stop, pretty much. So, I mean, theirs was a desperate journey, and all kinds of things happened. So it was a terribly exciting walk to do. But also very difficult to find paths and things because this isn't a trail. It was like we knew the cities they had walked between, and there's some description of like the way they were going because they were trying to confuse everybody about their direction. But we had to find paths, you know, we had to find paths and we had to avoid major roads. And, you know, it was pretty crazy, really, in many ways. He
Yeah,
was with one interesting thing is he was with his wife. Garibaldi was just an extraordinarily charismatic figure. And he had this Brazilian wife, Anita, who was famously also a soldier, if you like. And she was 6 months pregnant and she was on the walk with them. They were on horseback. It didn't end well for Anita. Um, so you know, there's a lot of drama to tell as well. So it was a great subject. And the more we walked and finally managed to get into the rhythm of it, the more I realized what an interesting experience it must have been for them as well, and how extraordinary. You know, this 1849 in Italy is probably about the last time that you have a generation of people who've never used motorized transport of any kind. Maybe one or two of these people have been on very early railways in Italy, but that would be about it. Um, so, you know, and you're the last period when the horse was a major military instrument, you know. So it's a very exciting sort of the last moment before modernity, really, in many ways. Yeah.
and so when you decided to do this, you knew you were going to write a book.
Well, you know, I mean, I've lived in Italy 40 years and I have written these 4 or 5 books about Italy, which have done pretty well, some of them. Um, But you know, you don't want to just write about Italy. You want to find some frame that sort of gives you a form to the, you know, to the. And I just thought maybe that will be it. But when we started the walk, I wasn't sure, you know.
So
I mean, I
that,
didn't do. I mean, we did another very long walk, Garibaldi walk later that I didn't write a book about. We
well,
just,
that's yeah, that was what I was
yeah,
going to ask you. Which this
we
one was a walking. You thought this was going to be a holiday, but it was like a working holiday.
Right. It was very emotional. I mean, like one thing I hadn't expected. I mean, we walked all of it. We never took any motor, not even an escalator. So one of the interesting things about that is that after like 10 days, 12 days, 15 days, you're always in the country. And these were not major paths. Sometimes it was pretty difficult to find your way. And you get this sense of continuity with the land, of actually being in the land in a different way, of being attached to physically to the land and to the rhythm of the walking. And that was an experience I hadn't expected, you know. And you realize what a companionship it must have been for them marching together, you know. And in fact, sometimes, like there's a note in one of Hofstadter's diaries when he says, "Today was our most beautiful march." And he actually uses the word beautiful, you know. Other days when obviously, you know, heavy rain, gunfire, I mean, other days were pretty difficult. Finding food and so on and so forth.
And what were the difficulties that you and Eleonora faced?
Heat above all, just the heat was just very difficult sometimes. We got used to it though. Water, finding places to sleep because you don't always know how far you're going to be. So at the beginning, we were just booking the same day. And sometimes you can't find anywhere and it's quite late at night and you have to walk more because you have to get there, you know.
Mm.
So yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
the interesting thing, I mean, let me just read a tiny little passage. The interesting thing was sort of aligning the past and the present and trying to make some sense of it. I'll just read a little bit. This is on like the third or fourth day. We're still quite near Rome, a place called Mentana. The pleasure of leaving before daylight, the household still asleep, sneaking down the stairs, shaking the dust from your feet. You don't have to have disliked the place. You're not avoiding any chores. It's simply freedom. I'm going. I'm going too early for the grind of goodbyes. Or rather, we're going, accomplices, free together, taking with us the boiled eggs the landlady left for breakfast, 2 portions of apricot jam. Did Garibaldi's men feel something like this? The joy of moving on, not knowing what the day would bring, but knowing it would not be the same as yesterday. Free in the wide world to savor the elegance of the bulrushes and the blue of the cornflowers, the smells of lavender and mint, the bray of a donkey, striding towards distant hills at dawn. Well, maybe they did. Or maybe they were just cursing to be prodded from their sleep in the early hours. Getting going is the toughest moment, Hofstetter writes. Today we have a list of places to visit, to start with the monastery just outside Mentana, where Anita and Hofstetter's the diarist, told the monks that the men of the rear guard would be arriving soon. The monks were frightened out of their wits, having been warned how fierce and evil Garibaldi was. Hence, they were relieved to discover that providing food and wine and floors to sleep on were all that was required. Anita checked the rooms and the grounds and decided who would go where. An illiterate Brazilian mother telling the learned celibates what was what in her approximate Italian, beside the German officer with his German accent, in the name of Italian freedom, Italian unity. But when we arrive in the Via del Conventino, on the outskirts of the town, the monastery is now a hotel, a picturesque pile behind a high wall, glimpsed through a thick cover of pines, oaks, and magnolias. It's 8:20. We could press a button on the gate, of course. We could ask to be let in. We could walk up to the drive to reception and explain that we're conducting inquiries into 1,000 and more guests who checked in without a booking on the evening of 4th of July, 1849. But I feel discouraged. It's just an old monastery turned hotel. Where is the piazza? Where is our coffee? So, one tries to sort of put the war alongside the facts and the Italy's extraordinary religious past, and then this hotel present, and so on and so forth.
But you also capture there, I think, too, the logistics that it must have involved. A couple of thousand or 4,000 people. You've got to find food, water, shelter.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the interesting things about the walk is that you realize that the way you're walking has to do with their logistical problems, like the problem of water in particular, but also the problems of where to sleep the men, because they couldn't take the men into the towns because Garibaldi was afraid that there would be friction. And he didn't want to give anybody any excuses for saying that they were in some way criminals, or so he didn't allow them to steal. If any of the men stole, they were shot immediately. They were just shot if they stole. So one of the things they did was stay frequently in monasteries, because obviously they had to find somewhere to go to the loo as well, I mean, they had to find food and so on and so forth. So, yeah, there are a lot of monasteries on the route, a lot of monasteries.
So tell me, so how many? I mean, you said that you've done a Garibaldi walk subsequently. Are you now thinking that you incorporate walks more in your writing? I mean, is that obviously Mr. Geography, which we haven't touched on yet, it uses you described it as a frame of a walk. But yeah, are you now becoming a
Let me
big
say
writer?
something about this. I tend not to do things 100 times over, but I do tend to do everything sort of twice, if you want. If you look at my books and begin to think about it, you'll notice that, I'll develop one thing and then maybe use the form for once again, and then that's it. I found the walking very, very interesting as a way of creating a frame for telling a story. I mean, journeys are often used as a frame for telling stories. You know, I've done that before, but walking was interesting. And so after I'd done this book, I had another story that I wanted to tell, which was the story of Mr. Geography. But I didn't have a frame for it. And very often I'll wait for years before writing a novel that I want to write until I've understood, like, what is the form into which I can put this story, you know?
Mhm.
And after doing this, I began to think about putting it into a walk story. And since one of the characters in the book, a woman who's a university literature professor, she's not the main person. The main person is Mr. Geography. And she's sort of obsessed with, you know, eco-linguistics and that, but also with D.H. Lawrence and D.H. Lawrence's environmental writing. So don't say that there's not much ecological stuff in my writing, because funnily enough, D.H. Lawrence's account of crossing the Alps in, I think it was, remembering now, 1912, is all very much about the ecological breakdown in the Alps due to tourism and so on, and industrialization. And I knew about this walk, and I thought, well, my hero, the woman, is somebody who might have wanted to redo that walk and write about it for academic purposes. And I just began to see that as a possible frame, and also as a great summer holiday, you know.
Yeah.
That's
Did
only
you,
about
did you walk
200.
it?
So
Yeah.
when I did that walk, I knew I was going to do the novel. Like when I did the Garibaldi walk, the first one, I didn't know really. I just had a sniff that it might be a good idea for a book. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a bit more about Mr. Geography. Tell us a bit more about where's the route take you, and also
How it works. Yeah,
intrigued.
let me, like, it might sound a little complicated, but it's really not. So basically, it's a variation on the affair novel, but from a very curious point of view. We have and here there are, you know, I mean, it is based on stuff that I kind of know a bit about, not my life, but fortunately, but somebody else's. So you have two people who've been having an affair. He's a headmaster at a school, and she's the mother of two of the children at the school. And because of that, they've decided that the affair can't ever be revealed, right? Now, it's not clear whether they're actually doing something illegal or not, probably not, but okay. So for 4 or 5 years, they've kept that affair in background. But then when the kids have finished the school, they decide to break free. And the occasion they use to break free is this walk, right? Okay. And then while they're on that walk, she's going to announce to the family that it's, you know. Um, but all of this happens like more than 20 years before our novel begins, because during that walk, something awful happens. Not necessarily on the walk itself, but something awful has happened, as a result of which they split up and never see each other again. But more than 20 years later, he decides to retake the walk because on her death, she has sent him the pages of D.H. Lawrence that they had with them. They're just 20 pages on this walk that they had with them when they did the walk. So he, as an older man, kind of recovers the intensity of that walk and what happened. And we learn the stuff that was going on that as we go on with the walk, you know. So it was great because the walk, which follows D.H. Lawrence from Constance, Lake Constance, through Zurich and Lucerne and across the Alps to Milan. They arrived in Milan. He arrived in Milan. He was walking alone. And that means that the walk starts on the flat and then it gets more and more, So as the drama gets bigger and bigger, recovering the past, you've got the more and more dramatic landscape. It's
So is that a walk you did yourself?
Oh yeah, we did. You couldn't have written this book without doing this walk. I mean, it's just it wouldn't have worked. I mean, I'll give you a slightly shorter bit from this. Um, I mean, this is a different way of mixing past and present. Like this is a moment on the walk early in the morning when she has just received a rather devastating text message from her daughter. And they are walking. How did we handle Catherine's text that morning? We walked in silence. Julia held the map and seemed particularly intent on our route. For the first time, I struggled to keep up. The cafes weren't open yet in Adlersville, or not on the road that we took, and she didn't want to wait or explore. Beyond another railway line, a steep scarp rises 1,500 feet to Felsenegg. Without a word, she led the way. Am I going to do the same now? I'm pretty hungry, but I settled into a steady stride, thoughtful and empty-headed. A few twists of a narrow lane, a cable car wire sagging overhead, a young man waiting for his dog to perform, poo bag in hand. Then the path branches off to the left, tunneling steep and dark into a broadleaf wood. I remember her walking ahead, her back bent to the slope, as though determined to show how much energy she had. I can see her pack and her boots and her bare calves, ducking under low branches, brushing aside strands of spider web. I remember wondering, how much longer can she keep this up? Deep in the woods, with the smell of the woods and the gloom and the cooler, fresher air, and the trees quite different here from yesterday's. No neat rows, no stacks of timber, trunks leaning this way and that, mosses and dead leaves, acorns and ivies, everything dense and green and dewy and brown, the bark and the fallen twigs and the dark black earth. Already I'm breathing hard, sweating profusely. I need to stop. I need a stick, perhaps. Up and up, panting on and on, until at last she went down. She went down on a rock beside the path. She sat down and plunged her face in her hands. I wait until there's a bench of kinds, a split trunk across a couple of stones, and sit down beside her, say nothing. So you got this feeling that he's kind of in two worlds at the same time. And yeah. And that was, that climb up to Felsenegg was like that, it's very steep, deep in the woods, narrow paths.
So when you're reflecting back on the walk you've done and putting your pen on paper or fingers on the typewriter, have you taken notes on the walk? Have you taken lots of photographs? Or have you actually written chunks of whatever you're going to?
No, 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 no. No, but I mean, Mr. Geography, I hadn't started at all before we did the war. I didn't start until about 2 or 3 months afterwards. And the same with the Garibaldi book. Um, Very occasionally, if I have an idea that I think is a really useful idea and I'm scared I'll forget it, I'll make the briefest of notes, usually in the evening. But honestly, the notes that I took on the Garibaldi War wouldn't amount to 10 pages in an exercise book. But what I do and what I learned to do on the Garibaldi War, I hadn't realized how important it was, is take millions of photos. Take photos, always take photos of the vegetation you're walking through, so that you really have a good record of what it felt like that day, the weather, so I took really a lot of photos. Unfortunately, with digital stuff, it's easy to take a lot of photos, often just photographing the ground, or, so that you can actually say what it's like where you're walking. Photographing a stream, So I'll read you 10 like this is much shorter than the others. This is high up in the mountains now when things have got pretty dramatic. I'm standing by a stream. A folly of white water tumbles between great black and brown boulders, smooth and shiny with erosion, like a panic of fat pigs stampeding down the mountainside. The path crosses the feature on a rope bridge. You can imagine if one of these rocks were dislodged. They must already have rolled a long way to get where they are now. You have the impression of some natural calamity that has been interrupted, frozen, the stampeding swine magically stilled, only the water crashing over their smooth backs. But at any moment, the avalanche will resume. And this is very much like the state of his life, frozen in this moment of when things went wrong, sort of thing. So, but I couldn't have written that bit about I couldn't have written that without having loads of photos and thinking about it.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, sure. And I mean, I want to encourage people to, ask questions and write things in the chat or write a question in the chat. But Jeff Jones has asked about whether The Hero's Way was published in Italian. Was that?
Yeah, sure. It's published in Italian. Yeah, yeah. And it got a wonderful review actually by a professor of Risorgimento history, who kind of said, finally, a new kind of book about the past. And because the thing that's really interesting about Garibaldi and his particular position was this feeling of belonging, of like that it was important to bring people together in this struggle and to feel that it was a shared struggle. So, for example, Garibaldi's famous in his books of mentioning all the people he can remember who were with him. If people died, he always wants to say their names and where they died and where. So, you know, when I was doing the book, there was very much this feeling of, do we still have this belonging together? I mean, I'm an Italian citizen now. Am I part of this? Is my wife part of this? My wife is from the south, from a part of Italy that was not really involved in this process. So, it was intensely about. I mean, it was quite an emotional book for me too, as as a sort of adopted citizen of this country. Yeah.
And you wrote The Hero's Way during COVID, did you not?
Well, that was a COVID. Who wants to remember COVID? But we did this walk in 2019, right? So, I started writing the book probably in late September. And then in January or February, the whole COVID thing began. So that for most of the writing of the book, there I am at my computer looking at these wonderful photos. I have I have more than 1,000 photos of this just extraordinary freedom that we enjoyed. I mean, every day it was 30 days, getting up early in the morning, walking 15 miles, 20 miles. Um, and then all of a sudden we were stuck in our flat in Milan and we were not even allowed to go out except to the supermarket. And we had armored cars on the street and policemen, you needed to fill in a form to go out of your flat. We don't even have a balcony or anything. And it was just like, Garibaldi's really about freedom and it was taken away from us, right? And I think that made the book more intense. I'm looking at this stuff thinking, when's the next time we're going to be able to go for a walk? You know? So there you go.
And so from writing these two books, what have you kind of learnt that you might use again, or is that you said that you only perhaps do something twice, and is
I
the
wouldn't, well, Well, I will not tell a lie. There will be one other book that's already written, and it will be the last, um, which is rather different. It involves walking in Sicily on the campaign, Garibaldi's successful campaign, when he landed in Sicily and with 1,000 men and actually amazingly beat an army of 20,000 men. Obviously, there were all kinds of strange circumstances that made that possible. So we walked from Western Sicily to Palermo, again in very hot weather. But the book is much more of a historical book than like there's a lot less of the walking and a lot more of what was going on because there's just a lot of archives and a lot of action and a lot of diaries, and it was a very exciting thing. But I'm always interested in mixing the past and present in the novels before these novels as well. I mean, in the sense that the present we live is very much made up out of how we interpret the past. I mean, that's true of politics. I mean, you only need to look at the news today and what's going on, that everybody has their version of the past and what's happened. And, um, so, and in our lives too, in a long marriage or in relationships, there's very much a sense of what's the present and where did this come from. So I've always played with that. I've generally had novels that are a short frame in the present, recovering something from the past, um, while something is also going on in the present as well. Yeah, because you need drama. It has to be the frame has to be an important moment of change in the present. So that's something I do. Although the book I'm writing a book now which is completely different, but that's another thing. I mean,
Well,
talking about the past comically, I opened the paper today and see that they've removed a painting of Admiral Nelson at Trafalgar from, I don't know, from Parliament. And you think, well, that's a big decision, removing, one of the most famous moments of British military history from Parliament and replacing it with a portrait of the present minister of whatever it is. You know, so there's always what we do about the past is a kind of indication of where we are now, I suppose. Yeah.
and your experience now of walking, you told me earlier to this before this event, you told me that you're now walking more in the UK.
Well, we did the Heroes Way in 2019. The following summer, which when they lifted the COVID thing, we did a walk between the Italian lakes. Again, we were following I won't bother to explain, an old military campaign, just to give us like, I don't want to do a walk on something, where everybody's following some pilgrim trail or something. I mean, I'm sure that's great too, but we kind of enjoy finding the paths. So we did that, and again, it was really hot. And we did the Mr. Geography walk, and unbelievably, in Switzerland, they had the biggest heat wave of all history when we did the walk. It was 40 degrees walking out of Constance, 40. And we thought, this is nuts. The following summer, we did another work. Again, this was, I won't explain, from Ravenna on the east of Italy to the west coast of Tuscany, southwest coast of Tuscany. That was 250 miles. Um, and that was just, again, impossibly hot. And at that point, we said, enough is enough. I mean, I didn't write a book about that. Enough is enough. So last year we walked up the Yorkshire coast because we thought it'll be cool, and it was, and it didn't rain, which was amazing. And it was very, very beautiful. So, we might walk along the North Cornish coast this year, or maybe down the west coast of Ireland, which would be fun. I mean, I think it's a great way to take a holiday, you know. It's just a great way to be out of it. You're away from your computer, you're away, you know, you're living out of your backpack for 3 weeks, 4 weeks. It's good. Yeah.
Yeah, and of your writing, are you, very disciplined? Do you do a 9 to 5, or do and
Does anybody do 9 to 5 these days? I mean, do even office work? I mean, I've always worked a lot, and I tend to write in the morning. I mean, I can work many hours in a day, but I can't write many hours in a day because writing's very taxing. I mean, it's a performance. Like you really have to do it when you do it. You know, I mean, everybody knows that experience where you're planning to write something and you think, oh yeah, I've got it all in my head. And then you sit down and you realize you haven't got it all in your head. You know, and then now you really have to do it. And you think, damn. So I only write max 4 hours a day, usually between about 9 and 1. And then I might do some other stuff in the afternoon. But, you know, I used to work a lot more. I used to teach at the university, and I used to translate as well, which I don't really do much anymore. So now I just work in the morning and I fool around with other stuff in the afternoon, frankly.
but you've got the walking bug. You're
Yeah, man. Well, you know, I've always walked a lot. I think it's a great way to stay fit, but it's always a great way to know the city you live in as well, you know? I mean, we do a lot of walking here in Milan. I'm speaking from Milan. But I hadn't taken walks as long as the Garibaldi walk before. I think that's a bit too long. I think 450 miles is a bit long,
It's a
frankly.
huge distance. It's not flat either. You were going up and down hill and
No, no, it's not flat at all. I don't think, yeah, I think the only day that was flat was the last day walking to the coast. No. I think like maybe it's a question of age, you know, I'm 70 now, but I think a walk of like 10 days to 2 weeks is great. But maybe more than that, I'm not sure if I'm up for it.
and what sort of distances do you try to do in that?
Well, you know, again, when we did the Hero's Way, we were trying to do the same distances they did. So some days that was really a lot, and some days it was only like 7 or 8 miles. Some days it was like 20 miles, you know. Once on the Sicilian walk, it was 42 kilometers, 26, 20, it was a marathon basically. And that was really tiring, you know. But normally I think 12 miles is a good,
Well,
it's
I'm
good
going to
if
say you're a super fit 70-year-old. I think there won't be that many 70-year-olds who are doing that kind of distance.
you meet people around, yeah. But I mean, you're leaving really early. We always leave, early, early, early.
And in Italy, you can walk anywhere. You're not challenged by people
We're
or.
challenged all the time. It's much worse than the UK. There's no sense of like the UK has this long tradition of people insisting on the rites of passage and stuff. In Italy, you just, we have an app to find paths, like we paid for the more expensive version of it. It will find paths, but the paths are often closed. And many of the paths in the Apennines, like when we did this walk from Ravenna to the Tuscan coast, on 3 or 4 occasions, we would have walked 7, 8 miles and then find you can't go on because the paths just unpassable, too many brambles, too many, you know, deep ponds that you don't know what's there and stuff. And then you don't see a soul. Like the Apennines in Italy are completely empty. I mean, you can walk 8 hours and not see anybody. Um, so it can be quite frightening, because if it's very hot, you just think, how much water am I going to have to carry? Because you can't always find water where you're going. So no, we've had a lot of experiences where you just suddenly find there's a huge fence and you have to turn back, or I could tell some stories, but it's hardly the moment. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm aware we're sort of down to the last 5 or 6 minutes. If there's anyone in the room that wants to ask a question, or please unmute yourself and fire away. Um, we're on previous occasions we've run multiple choice quizzes and given away books, but unfortunately, we're not sure why, but Tim and I have not managed to wrestle a book from his publisher. His publisher.
Obviously a gold dust. I don't know what's wrong with these people. Yeah. Um,
And but Tim, you've always been published by Penguin, have you not? I mean, or not? You've
no, I've always been published by Harville Secker, first Secker and Warburg, then Harville. And, publishers just become part of different groups, So a few years, I mean, their paperback was Vintage, and then Vintage became part of Penguin. So, Penguin is now the biggest publisher in the world. It's kind of Random House, Penguin, and everything else. Um, it's a bit frightening, frankly. Like they seem to own the world more or less. Yeah.
and are they knocking on your door and saying, we want another book, Tim?
No, no. No, it doesn't. It certainly doesn't work like that. Obviously, publishers are always looking for the new next best sliced bread thing. And I've kind of given them a certain level of sales. I'm probably safe enough, but I'm not the height of fashion, and we live in very political times, and I don't need to go into all that stuff, but you can well imagine, yeah. So, and of course, publishers' jobs are not very well paid. They keep changing, they keep rationalizing. So often you find you're working with different people who don't know your work from the past. So, there's it's not great times in publishing. But on the other hand, I'm very grateful to them. They've published a lot of my books and put them in nice paperbacks. And so, they've done a good job by me. But
But also on the kind of teaching and mentoring writers, you've done quite a bit of that yourself too, haven't you? Because you've done this. Um, I don't know how do you describe it? Writing craft. You've done things for New York Times.
yeah, but those are things, the essays I've done for the New York Review books or the London Review of Books are not mentoring things. They're kind of literary essays about the books coming out. I have a regular piece once a month in the TLS, which is a short and generally reflective piece. Yeah, I mean, I love writing and thinking about writing and thinking about literature, and we live in times too where it's so much, I'm going to use so much bullshit is talked about writing, and writing's going to save the world and we can't live without stories and all that. And I feel that just muddies the waters. It's not quite like that. So I'm a I'm a bit of a spoil sport in a way. I kind of try and bring people back to earth about writing is wonderful, but not everybody has to be reading books and so on. So I've done a lot of teaching. It was part of the job. If you have a job like I was teaching a few hours a week in the university, then it means that when you write a book, you don't have to be absolutely sure you're going to make money, because quite likely you're not going to make money. So there you
And
go.
what's what's next? Oh, you've already mentioned there is another book coming, which
Yeah, I mean, I'm writing very, very slowly a rather odd and different novel. What can I say? Um, I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know. I'm about halfway through. Sometimes you think, did I get the right subject? But it's something. Every book for me has to be a kind of life book. It has to be something that really, really I care about. There has to be a drama where you feel you're putting your own ideas and stuff on the line. So, I'm not. On the other hand, I'm a great admirer of people who can do a good detective story, but that's not for me, you know.
Yeah, and can I ask, excuse me, how long does it take you to write? You know,
It's a piece of string question, you know.
yeah,
I've written books quite fast in the past. I think the first novel I wrote, which in the end was only the first novel that was published, which because I wrote quite a few before they were published, was only about 130 pages I must have written in 2 months, and that won a bunch of prizes and got my name around, but I only won a bunch of prizes after being refused by about 20 publishers. So, you know, uh, like when a book's successful, it's just because a bunch of people have suddenly decided that they enjoyed it. But it could equally well happen that your book doesn't meet that bunch of people, and people have other ideas of what would be a good book in mind, and you don't. So, you know, it's a very strange thing. Uh, Making your career depend on the whims of other people, you know, it's a strange thing, yeah. You
brilliant.
have to be
Well,
patient. You have to be patient.
Tim, thank you very much. I mean, you've given us a fantastic hour of
No, no,
entertainment, which
no.
is more than enough than we can ask for. Everyone seems to have fallen silent, apart from Jeff Jones. So well done, Jeff, at least having a go and giving us a message. He says it's strange there isn't a Garibaldi trail, but maybe you.
No, well, you know, Jeff, that's actually an interesting question because when I did this book, I thought, damn, this would be such a good trail. There are a number of very short sections where particularly around Romagna where just for like a few miles it's indicated that Garibaldi passed there. So when I did this book, lots of people have been in touch trying to sort out a trail, but the politics of it are crazy because you have to convince the local government to uh, clean up, find and clean up paths. And then the different regions of Italy have to agree together because the path crosses and they all disagree. And all the local towns disagree with each other, you know? And it's expensive. And then in the times of the European community, everybody's trying to forget that you know there was a time when the nation state mattered and so on and so forth. So there are all kinds of reasons, but there is a guy who's invited me to Tuscany in spring where we are apparently going to inaugurate a small part of the trail, a couple of days. Yeah, so, you know, maybe it will happen.
I'm just saying that there are cases, I think, in the UK where this sort of thing is overinterpreted. And I think there's a certain amount of pleasure in just stumbling across places which perhaps,
Absolutely. Yeah. No,
yeah.
I agree. I avoid trails. So, you know, I'm not sure that I would have walked it if it had been all signposted and so on, you know, yeah. I must admit, one of the biggest pleasures of this thing was the logistics, you know, like, so where are we going to walk? What's the terrain like? How's it going to be possible? Where are we going to sleep? Where are we going to find food? How much water are we going to be carrying? I mean, you know, we made a couple of mistakes on that. And once I nearly ended up like that poor BBC guy. You know, I passed out in Sicily when it was like 40 degrees and we ran out of water. And that was a serious moment. Yeah. But you know, I was in company fortunately, and we were able to sort ourselves out. Yeah.
We'll wrap it up now and say a big thank you, Tim. I mean, that's been fantastic, really good. And
Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening. And
yeah,
on
and go out and buy his books. Yeah.
happy walking, happy walking, and happy reading. Okay. Good
Brilliant.
night, everybody. Good night.
All
Good
the
night.
best. All right. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks.